Thanks for joining us today for the first panel ASEAN 4.0 E-commerce and Health. I'm Ravindran Go, founder of ATTN, the ASEAN Think Tank Network, and I will be moderating the session. So today we'll have the chance to have three distinguished speakers from Malaysia, Cambodia, and Myanmar. The format of this session will be a webinar of around 45 minutes. It will be an interactive session followed by a Q&A session at the end. You can ask your question in the Q&A box on the top of your screen. The e-commerce and health sector has grown rapidly and even has been accelerated by the current pandemic and the fourth industrial revolution. So I'm very happy to introduce to our first speaker, Dr. Ho Asean from Malaysia. Asean is a senior fellow at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs and principal advisor for the Pacific Research Center of Malaysia. Previously, he was political secretary to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Asean is also a council member of the Commonwealth Magistrate and Judge Association. He is also an avid commentator and columnist on politics, economics, and current affairs for various international media. He will share with us the development of e-commerce in Malaysia with his opportunities and challenges. Asean, over to you.
Yes, I would need, the transfer. Well, thank you very much, Ravindra, for inviting me to this forum. I would like to share with our viewers some of the e-commerce developments in Malaysia specifically, but I think in large parts of Southeast Asia, it's perhaps also a similar trend. I think at this point, frankly speaking, it is a bit too early to get the latest figures as to the e-commerce developments over, for example, the last half a year during this coronavirus pandemic. But even by anecdotal evidence, I think it is safe to predict in Malaysia at least a steady, if not explosive, growth in e-commerce, both in its revenue. And when we talk about revenue, that means the total revenue of e-commerce, but also the per user revenues in terms of the revenue for e-commerce, as well as a rise in its user penetration. This is, of course, necessitated by the pandemic in a sense, because a lot of people, myself included, would like to avoid physical contacts as much as possible and switch to online, for example, purchases. And therefore, this e-commerce trend, in a sense, it follows the pandemic development very closely. For example, during the first half of the year when Malaysia was locked down, I think a lot of people did indeed make their purchases online. As the lockdown was loosened a little bit, well, a lot of people started going out and start to purchase their goods and services physically. And then in the last 1.5 months or so, as there's another lockdown because there's a rise in the pandemic, well, people again switch to e-commerce in a big way. So it follows the pandemic trends quite closely. Now let's look at some of the features and opportunities for e-commerce in Malaysia nowadays. I think this so-called new normal of people avoiding physical contact under and after the pandemic, I think it will require the definition of e-commerce to be broader. We have to define e-commerce to be broader, and I will talk about it slightly later, so that we can also capture this sort of what I would call bricks to clicks transformation, of people transforming their physical businesses into online businesses. Now, for example, I think over the last, let's say, 9 months or so, we saw e-commerce growth in Malaysia in the sale of household necessities and perishable goods. So we are talking about groceries, your detergent, and so on, but also food items, both raw food items, your meat and fish and vegetables, as well as cooked food items you order out from restaurants. This is in addition to, of course, the sale online of more durable and bulky goods. For example, electronics and furniture, because more and more people, well, like myself, are working from home as a necessity. So you need good electronics and you need good furniture, very comfortable chair that I have here to make sure you can indeed work very efficiently from home. So there's not only, I think if you define e-commerce nowadays, it's not only the traditional B2C, business to consumer, but also the consumer to consumer platforms as well. For example, people are selling used goods, their so-called pre-loved goods, fashion items, and so on, decorative items, earrings, and so on, at discounted prices, so that they can make extra income during this very difficult pandemic time. So what we saw is some of this what I will call sentimental goods, such as gifts and premiums. They can sell if they are affordable, in a sense that people can afford to buy it. You also see a rise in online bartering trade, people exchanging items, my earrings for your earphones, for example, or even online auctions. Some of my friends, they are doing online auctions even for seafood. You know, my home state of Sabah in Malaysia is famous for seafood. I saw some of my friends who previously have seafood stores or shops. They are now doing seafood online auctions, but there's a lack of a formal platforms for doing so. It's only makeshift platforms, sometimes doing it on the on Facebook and so on. We also see a rise of crowdfunding services for the small and medium enterprises, for micro enterprises, and even for social enterprises, people raising funds online. Well, traditionally, this is not considered e-commerce, but I think you should include it nowadays. And also, of course, the rise of fintech, of online companies trying to become banks, for example, loaning out small amount of money. So in general, you see a rise of provision of services online, services which are provided over or assisted by online platforms like our online meeting now. You also see people doing banking online, doing their payments online, and using online platforms for education and training purposes. Even some of these multi-level marketing companies or direct sale companies, they are also using online facilities to promote their goods and services. You also see a change perhaps in user demographics, e-commerce user demographics. They change and they expanded a little bit. You see teenagers, for example, and young adults, very often school students, they became influencers or key opinion leaders, KOLs, right? As online spokesperson for various products and services. Some of them since really their teenage, since their high school. And then I have some friends, their children, after graduating from universities as lawyers and doctors, they don't want to be lawyers and doctors. They want to be influencers, KOLs, spokespersons. They're selling their products online instead of going into their profession. You also see, of course, participation by homemakers, housewives, and house husbands, and disadvantaged groups. It enables them to go into business online much easier nowadays. And even old people, they are very enthusiastic in becoming KOL sometimes, or at least users. What are some of the challenges and prospects? Well, I think the main challenge is still the very underdeveloped IT infrastructure, both in terms of speed and coverage, especially in the rural areas of Malaysia, such as my home state of Sabah in Malaysia. A few months ago, there was this female students, because of the pandemic, she had to take a university exam at home, right? So she had to climb up to a tree in order to get a better Wi-Fi, signal coverage, and that was in all the news in Malaysia. So also there's inadequate logistical arrangements for the delivery of those goods you purchase online. For example, if those goods are imported, sometimes they are stuck at the ports and airports because of quarantine requirements and custom clearance requirements. So there's a need for local production centers, local packing centers. The goods may be from outside the country, but you need to pack it domestically. And of course, for distribution hubs locally, domestically, in some of this, in Malaysia and I think in other ASEAN countries. And of course, the last mile problem. Some especially in rural areas, you don't have clear addresses and so on. I think some other speakers may also speak about it. So I think when you try to do online business, you need to balance between affordability, whether in your particular market, is it too expensive or is it too cheap? Necessity, do people actually need it as a basic necessity, or is it just an amenities which is nice to have? And of course, what value addedness, what do you value add to that product so that you could sell it online? And of course, I think I've been talking about this new normal, that people avoid physical contact after and during the pandemic, right? But what if, well, we are Asian. Sometimes we like to have physical gatherings and so on. What if after the pandemic is over, well, we go back to a more physical setting? We sometimes like to touch the goods that we are purchasing, right? How can that be achieved online? Or do we still need to have a combination of online and offline type of business combination, so that people can actually touch the products before they buy it? And of course, I think the main lesson is e-commerce development would go hand in hand with the general economic development. If the economy is doing well, people are more willing to buy. They will buy both offline and also online. If economy is bad in general, then the demand is not so high. So I will just share with you some of these e-commerce developments in Malaysia in particular, and perhaps ASEAN in general. I hand back to you, Ravindra. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight. I will just shift back the mic. Sorry. Yes, so thanks, Hassan, for sharing your expertise. You address, I think, two important points: the opportunity of the e-commerce in Malaysia also, which is not only B2C but also moving to C2C platform.
Yes.
And also you touch another important challenge that we will see whether, like you said, the trend post-pandemic, and if people will still buy online. This is, I think, something we should really, and I think will affect or not the rise and the growth of the e-commerce, especially in Malaysia. So now I want to introduce you to our second speaker, Mr. Sven Kayebo, located in Cambodia, but originally from France. Sven wears many hats. He is a senior trade policy advisor for ASEAN and Pacific Island governments and a recognized expert on e-commerce strategy. He is also working as lead e-commerce advisor for UNDP Cambodia, serving as a trade and digital trade policy advisor to the Ministry of Commerce, Union of Myanmar. He has advised several trade ministries, including Bhutan, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar on their trade and digital trade development strategies. And he's also graduated from Harvard Kennedy School. Today, he will introduce the e-commerce ecosystem development, and more especially in Cambodia. So the floor is yours, Sven.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ravi, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this first ATTN event. Congratulations for putting that together. If you don't mind, Ravinder, I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation here that would be of interest to our audience today. Can you confirm you can see the presentation?
Very well, Sven.
All right,
very well.
perfect. So I'd like to say that I will echo some of the comments and remarks that made just before, and very to the point, with a little caveat, which is that Cambodia is not yet at the development level that Malaysia or other Asian member states are. So while we have experienced a tremendous growth of e-readiness over the past months, I would say we gained maybe 2 years of e-readiness in 6 months because of the pandemic. There are some, I would say, foundations, bottlenecks and challenges that we are still experiencing here in Cambodia or in other frontier markets that you're going to see through the presentation I'm going to make now. So in the past few months, we've seen a lot of development in the institutional framework for e-commerce. 2 days ago, we launched the e-commerce strategy. The Ministry of Commerce launched the e-commerce strategy. Last year, we launched the e-commerce law and the implementation decree. We had the trade integration strategy with a focus on e-commerce and the rural government rector strategy with a full development angle on digital economy. So all this happened in the past 2 to 3 years. So there's been a lot of interest also from public authorities in the past few years for e-commerce. And why this sudden interest for e-commerce? Of course, there is the peer pressure from other, as a member state, people are buying online, but also because e-commerce is a very important tool in a development context, because with e-commerce adoption, with e-commerce acceleration, you can boost digital entrepreneurship, you can boost digital literacy and digital financial literacy, you can increase and improve the regulatory framework, the laws, the documents that government entities have to put online, what we call the digitalization process, is also spurred through e-commerce adoptions. When we talk about e-commerce development or ecosystem, as this is the trendy word for talking about e-commerce ecosystem, if you talk to the private sector, people who are actually doing trade, platforms, merchants, etc., they always tell you the same things. They tell you, well, there are 2 things that are needed here in any markets for e-commerce. One is the payment system. People have to pay for the goods they are buying or the services they are buying in a user-friendly, in an easy way. And second is the delivery. So basically, merchants and platforms say, well, fix those 2 things and then everything will be all right. Unfortunately, that's not that simple, especially in frontier markets, where we have a lot of other issues to solve before we can fix the payment and the delivery. Here on the screen, you see the 4 different angles of the ecosystem, or the 4 different dimensions to make e-commerce work. From the firm level capabilities, where businesses have to be formal, have to be ICT literate and equipped with ICT. From the business environment, from the industry associations, the access to finance and skills, the export promotion when you do cross-border e-commerce, the guidelines for operators, how to build trust online, the national environments, those are the laws, the regulations, the policies needed for e-commerce to flourish. And finally, I think Asean also alluded to that, the international environments, because we are not alone. As soon as we cross border, as soon as the goods cross border, we have to consider the bilateral trade arrangements, behind the border issues, the regional agreements that we have in ASEAN and now in RCEP, and the multilateral agreement that countries like Cambodia, but also Malaysia and Myanmar have made in international fora on e-commerce. So in e-commerce, you see in Cambodia, we have identified 10 different aspects that need to be addressed for e-commerce to really function. And here you have them on the screen. I'm not going to go into details of that. And of course, there are a lot of different stakeholders and players involved, not only the merchants, not only the marketplaces, but you have the operator, the central bank, the regulator, the tertiary education, the ICT firm, the incubator. So it's a whole ecosystem that you need to have in place for e-commerce to flourish. And I guess similar to Malaysia, we can see in Cambodia 3 ways of doing e-commerce. And I would concur with Mr. Asean's view on the definition of e-commerce. For instance, what happened here in Cambodia and also in Myanmar is a lot of e-commerce is actually social commerce. It is buying through Facebook, through Instagram. You see a product or you see an influencer and you want to buy the product that he or she is promoting. You just send your phone number, somebody calls you, and then arrange for the payment and delivery. This is also e-commerce. We cannot segregate by saying, well, it's informal, it's social, so it's not. It's actually one of the biggest forms of e-commerce in Asia. Second, you have self-owned, operated e-commerce websites, well-established companies that have sell their product and services online. And in Cambodia, is mostly for a handicraft, it's mostly for arts, for body care products, for baby food product that you can find this e-commerce website, where it's a single company platform and it's a one-on-one relationship with the consumers. But of course, it's very expensive. You need technical support for creating and maintaining this full-service e-commerce site. And the most, I would say, visible form of e-commerce in Cambodia is through marketplaces. And here on the screen, you have a few examples of providers of marketplaces operating in Cambodia. Most of them have been operating for only, I would say, 2 to 3 years. And there are a lot more. I think we counted 2 months ago more than 50 platforms and marketplaces. So it's a very dynamic business model, the marketplace. It's convenient because it's cheaper, there's low barrier to entry. You have an access to a shared infrastructure such as payment, escrow service, delivery services that are already provided to you. Of course, there's a high competition, especially for the weekly differentiated products. And there's a whole range of platform and marketplaces, be there for product, for services, for good, for food services, for consumer goods, for travel and transport. So you can find a lot of different marketplaces for your need. And the marketplace are very strong, but the fintech sector is even going stronger. And you can see on the screen the different players, and this is already 1 year old, so there are more players from the B2B to the B2B, the C2C. You have a lot of different players operating already in Cambodia. And finally, because it's a frontier market, because it's a least developed economy, we also have to bear in mind that there's a lot of support coming from development partners. I have put here the 3 main donor agencies supporting e-commerce development in Cambodia: UNDP, the Australian government, and the Enhanced Integrated Framework under the WTO. And their support, interestingly, has shifted from purely supporting ICT infrastructure, digital literacy, to more soft approach, like supporting MSME to onboard platform, supporting skill development, incubators, accelerators, etc. So their support is shifting because the e-commerce ecosystem is also maturing in Cambodia. Similar to what Mr. Asean said before, we've seen a trend, and I think it's here to stay. It will outlive the crisis. We've seen a trend towards greater online e-commerce. and we expect it to continue. And what is this trend? It's more and more retail store closing and not reopening, and more people buying and also selling online on marketplaces. We've seen it with the pandemic. It's not only e-commerce, it's edutech, it's e-health, it's recruitment, placement job, it's classified. A lot of this is moving online, and I think if the right conditions are here, they will continue to sell online and even grow. So what we've seen in Cambodia during the pandemic is we've seen a number of instruments and tools to help MSME to move from offline to online. First of all, to digitize, then to digitalize some of the documents, and then to be able to sell online. So for instance, we have seen these good practice guides for MSME to move from offline to online, produced by the Ministry of Commerce and the Australian government. We've seen a number of loans, a number of grants provided by different development partners and by the government to accelerate this transition. Last, Ravindra, you asked for the challenges. So here I have two slides for the challenges. I have one slide on the challenges for policymakers. And we have to realize that e-commerce is still very new in government circles. So how you get officials to understand the concept of e-commerce, and Dr. Asean was mentioning the complexity of the definition of e-commerce. So how you explain this in a layman language to government officials? How you leverage e-commerce towards development growth, not only for business development, but also for national development? How you encourage trust and confidence in buying and selling online? How you ensure efficient coordination between public and private on e-commerce development? How you measure e-commerce transactions? There's very little data and statistics. So when you're a government official, you rely a lot on statistics and data. So where are they? How can I base my policy making on inexisting data? So this is a very important issue. For the private sector, we see a lot of difficulties on the financial aspect, on the digital literacy, because even though e-commerce has grown so much in the past 3-4 years, I would say in Cambodia, 90% of the payment is what we call cash on delivery, COD. So you deliver the goods to my home, I check the goods. If this is the goods I asked with the quality I expected, then I pay you. And this creates a lot of difficulties, a lot of constraints, in addition to the cost of handling cash, which is very high. We have trade facilitation issues in frontier markets, like for instance, we don't have physical addressing system. So how do I deliver goods to your home if your home does not have a proper address? And in cities like Phnom Penh, we have addresses sometimes. Outside Phnom Penh, we don't. So how do you deliver? How do you can be innovative and creative to find new solutions to deliver goods to the consumers? And the digital entrepreneurship culture is still nascent. So we have to make sure that we guide, we mentor, we incubate these promising startups and ideas so that one day they become the Cambodian unicorn or the ASEAN unicorn. Finally, the last slide, which is on the future. So what if future growth hinges on? There's lots to be done. There's a lot to be done in terms of compliance vis-a-vis the e-commerce law, in terms of professionalization of the sector, of the formalization of the sector, because a lot of merchants and vendors are still informal. We have to bear in mind the gap between the capital city and the provinces. We have to make sure SME can and must innovate and learn to compete with domestic competition and international competition. And we also have to look at different sectors that could potentially start cross-border e-commerce, because most of the e-commerce in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Laos is domestic. It's very little is cross-border. So I will stop here, Mr. Ravindra. Thank you again for giving the opportunity to present Cambodia's e-commerce ecosystem. And obviously, I'll be very happy to answer any question you may have for me, from yourself, or from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven, for this insightful presentation. I think that we learned that there is many challenges for policymakers, as you mentioned, related to e-commerce, such as how to measure e-commerce transaction, but also understanding the concept of e-commerce within government. And I think it's really important, and it really brings the value of your work and your role within this context and problematic, which is really significant. Thanks, Sven, again. Now, after seeing these two key experts in the e-commerce field, let's go now to Myanmar with our next guest speaker and last speaker for today's sessions within the health sector. Dr. Ten Zan Lin is the founder and CEO of several companies, Hub Myanmar, On Doctor, and Mahar Tukamen. He's also the editor-in-chief of Myanmar B2B Management magazine. In October 2019, we welcomed Professor Philip Kotler, one of the founders of marketing worldwide renowned, as his World Marketing Summit in Yangon, which he organized. He also received multiple prizes, among them the ASEAN Business Award 2019 under the category Startup and Innovation-Driven Entrepreneur. Today, he will introduce the digital health and practice in Myanmar through his healthcare app On Doctor. Dr. Lin, over to you.
Yes. So can you see me?
Very well.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for organizing this wonderful event. So I'm very glad to participate in this event. So I will share my screen. So can you see my screen?
It's downloading and now it should be fine. It's perfect. The floor is yours.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to reflect the statistics of the health sector in Myanmar. So in Myanmar, let's say the statistics. There's only one doctor in 5,500 people in Myanmar. So that is the numbers counting the doctors like me. So for me, for example, like I'm not practicing after my graduation since 2008. In Myanmar, so there's only one doctor in 5,500 people. So that is quite interesting. So very few numbers comparing with the other Asian countries. And then, so in Myanmar, so we have still challenges in the logistics and infrastructures. But one of the wonderful things is like this. Before 2012, the mobile penetration rate in Myanmar is only 7% in Myanmar before 2012. So, but now, so it is about 117. I think so over 117% of the people. So the mobile penetration rate is really high within a few years. So that's quite challenging, and that's a very good opportunity to provide the health services through the telecommunications. So in 2016, I started my company as On Doctor. So by connecting the people to the doctors, so to connect doctors and connecting patients. So since actually, so I've started my startup as like a social media. Starting from the social media, just founded and created a social media page, especially Facebook page. So in Myanmar, so almost all the people, a lot of people are using Facebook. For example, like the number of Facebook users is much more than internet users. So in Myanmar, so there are 22 millions of people are using social media. So I've started my startups from the Facebook, just answering the questions from the people. So a lot of people are asking a lot of questions, and then so I've launched the first startup, the first mobile app in 2017 April as a very first mobile app. So in that time, so only few call centers have been here, but no other like mobile applications or teleconsultations and telemedicine app. So till now, so within 4 years, so we have won like several awards, including the 5 ASEAN winners and one merit winner from the Asia Smart app and one merit winner from the World Information Technology and Services Alliance company. So how we run the digital health in Myanmar? So for me, I run in 3 pillars. One is the teleconsultation. So that means like we are connecting the patients and doctors, so they can chat or they can call a video conference for the healthcare. And second is like we are publishing and creating the contents through the social media, and we are publishing through the mobile app. So on social media, so within 4 years, we have over 1.5 million followers on social media. It is organic followers. So as a third pillar, so we are also running house call services. For example, like if the people needs the doctors or specialists, just call to the on doctor, and we send the doctors to their home, like the Grab as a like a doctor's Grab or doctor's Uber. So because the reason why I started in 2016 is that I've noticed that in Myanmar, so like there's a very good opportunity for the like opportunity and market. Like a serviceable optimum market is at least 2.2 million users in Myanmar. So during the COVID-19, a lot of people they cannot go to the clinics or hospitals. They just come to the mobile app and just use the mobile app for the teleconsultations. So the number of transactions and the number of consultations are increasing a lot. I think much more than 15 times than before the COVID-19. So in our app, so we have some features like doctors and patients can chat directly and privately. So, and doctors and patients can call the video conference and they can read the contents. And so we are also adding the built-in wallet, and so they can top up and pay the bill, medical bill, very easily. So, and then so we are also recording the health records and medical records in the mobile applications on the cloud. So, so that is quite interesting questions. One of the questions is like, is it teleconsultation is like approved by government or not? So actually in Myanmar, this is very interesting. So there's still no teleconsultation regulations in Myanmar. We are preparing for that regulations. So we are inspiring from the other ASEAN countries. So for example, like for the teleconsultation, so we should have and practice and follow ISO 27001 and so HIPAA, so Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So we have to follow these guidelines. And then so nowadays we are also partnering with some government sectors, including the Young Children Hospitals from the government. So we are providing the remote healthcare to the like some other cities from the Yangon. That means the patients from the other cities just go to the hospitals and clinics in their cities and get the teleconsultation from the Yangon and Mandalay and other key cities. So they can get like a collaborative care through our mobile application. So the government worked together with me, and we are also partnering with some other like brand associations, like a brand partnership with the agricultural tech and brand partnership with some mobile companies like Samsung. And so we are partnering with the mobile operators and insurance company as a Daiichi. And we are also partnering with many other employers like the one of CityMart. So CityMart is the leading retail companies in Myanmar. So they are providing to their employees through the teleconsultations by using our app. So that is quite interesting. And then so we are providing the healthcare through the brands and through the employers and through the mobile operators. So that can be outreached more. So in addition, so in Myanmar, so there's still no regulation. And then so some of the players and in teleconsultations and telemedicine, they are just using like a third-party mobile applications like the Viber, Messenger, and other communication tools. And that is really actually, so that is not ethical. And sometimes that is not like compliance with the legal regulations. So we have to care about that because we are keeping the patient's data, but we follow the guidelines of ISO 27001 and HIPAA. So that is more safe to the people. So sometimes the technology is good, but if we cannot control very well, so there is a leakage, especially in the health sector. We have to be more careful about that.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for this sharing the telemedicine and health sector in Myanmar. I think it's something that's also, like other countries, have a strong potential, but also present some limitations as fraud and risk for health and abuse, like also and also that your technology can control this fact. So before I close the webinar session, I have 2 questions that I wish to ask first to Asean. So this first question is, in a more regional context of ASEAN, and speaking about bilateral ties between Malaysia and Singapore as your neighbor, what are some e-commerce limitations in kind of e-connectivity between these two countries? Asen,
Thank
over to
you.
you.
Yes, thank you. I'm accepting your transfer. Well, I think Malaysia and Singapore, while they share very similar market segmentations, there are also a lot of socio-economic differences. For example, if you were to have some goods which you like to sell either in Singapore or Malaysia, then you might have to price it differently. Usually, you see the Malaysia and Singapore dollars exchange rate, it's about 1 to 3. 1 Singapore dollar is 3 Malaysian ringgit, right? But usually the rule of thumb is if you sell for one ringgit in Malaysia, sorry, you sell for $1 in Singapore. In order to make it sellable or affordable in Malaysia, you probably have to sell it for 1 ringgit. So some of the merchants, let's say in Singapore, they may not be very happy to do so. Number 2, even though connectivity, I mean, in IT connectivity nowadays, I mean, comparable in Malaysia and Singapore, still Singapore has a much faster IT network than Malaysia. So if we are talking about provision of services over the internet and so on, perhaps people would prefer Singapore more. And then, of course, if you do sell goods across borders, even though we are very close friends, but let's say during this pandemic time, right? Well, would one country impose more stringent quarantine rules on the goods of the other country, for example? I think all these remain issues to be sorted out. But other than that, usually these are perhaps two of the more developed economies in Southeast Asia. So they do share a lot of commonalities in terms of the e-commerce. Thank you.
Thank you, Asen. Very, very good point. So now we will finalize with the last question for Sven, coming from the audience. So Sven, the question is that innovative partnerships among tech companies, banks, governments, and education providers can accelerate digital transformation for small business and e-commerce. From your experience, Sven, any similarity between Cambodia and Myanmar?
Hi again. Ravindra, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Very well, Sven.
Perfect. So thanks for the questions. I think that there are 2 parts in your questions. I'll try to answer both. Definitely, the first part, innovations, incubation, entrepreneurship is what is needed to drive the e-commerce process, the e-commerce adoption in Cambodia and in Myanmar. What we see in both countries is a very young population, innovative and creative, tech savvy, and very important, it's mobile first country. Those 2 countries use internet, access to internet, Facebook, e-commerce through mobile, not through computer, not to type, through mobile. So what we're observing in both countries, both economies, is that a lot of the innovation is geared towards the telephone, the usage that is made of the mobile phone by the youth, by the ACT savvy. So out of these, I like what Dr. Asean was telling us about his friends. I think we're seeing the same trend here. In the past, everybody wanted to be a government official. Then everybody wanted to be a lawyer or wanted to be a doctor. And nowadays, the youth, what they want to do, regardless of the diploma, is they want to go online, they want to sell their product, they want to create, they want to innovate, they want to change, they want to challenge, they want to do hackathon, they want to do challenge grants, innovation, etc. And it's very new. And the ecosystem in both economies was not prepared for that initially. The ecosystem was more for the typical brick and mortar entrepreneurship. So there's a huge drive nowadays from the government, from the private sector, and also from development partners to direct investment in the soft part. And when we say the soft part, it's the skills, the knowledge, and the attitude towards digital world. This is changing, and this is changing very fast. And hopefully this will outlive the crisis we have gone through in the past few months. I hope I have answered your question, Ravindra.
Yes, very well. Thank you so much, Sven. So now it's time to end with these sessions. I really want to thank all participants, but also all the guest speakers for their insightful presentation. This afternoon, we'll have 2 other webinar sessions focused on social impact and new technologies in line with ASEAN 4.0 with young leaders and entrepreneurs from Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, and Malaysia. Have a nice day, and thank you again.
Thank you, Ravindra, and thank you, ATTN, for the opportunity. Good
Bye-bye.
job.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.